Jake's face was burned beyond recognition, a silent testament to war's fury. Yet when he sat down for a simple haircut, the barber's cold refusal cut deeper than any scar. "I don't do burns." Suddenly, a quiet town's small act of cruelty ignited a storm of loyalty and fury. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Thornton's boots clicked quietly on the faded linoleum floor of Tommy's cuts, the familiar scent of talcum powder and stale aftershave filling the air like a stubborn memory. The morning light streamed through the dusty front windows, illuminating the worn leather chairs and cracked mirrors that had served the town for decades. Yet, despite the comfort this place once held for Jake, it felt suddenly foreign, even hostile. His left hand instinctively touched the edge of the thin hair growing back unevenly over the scarred skin of his scalp, a reminder of the blast that had nearly taken his life and forever changed his reflection. Tommy, the barber, wiped his hands on a rag and gave Jake a long, uneasy look. There was a twitch at the corner of Tommy's mouth, like a smile half-formed and quickly retracted. For a moment, Jake thought maybe Tommy was just startled, unsure how to react to a face so altered by war. But then Tommy's voice cut through the silence, cold and final. "Sorry, I can't cut your hair. Maybe try somewhere else." The words hung between them like a wall, unmovable, unyielding. Jake's throat tightened as he fought the urge to let anger flare. Instead, he nodded slowly, forcing himself to speak in a voice quieter than he felt. "Why?" Tommy's eyes flicked away, avoiding contact, his answer brutal in its honesty. "I just don't do burns. It's too complicated, and, well, some folks get uncomfortable." He didn't even try to mask the judgment in his tone, the subtle disgust that Jake felt like a slap to the face, sharper than any physical wound. Jake stared down at his hands, knotted and calloused from years of training and survival. The ache inside him wasn't about vanity. It was about dignity. The war had taken everything from him, his youth, his innocence, parts of his body. But he had hoped to reclaim something small, something human in the simplest of acts, getting a haircut. Instead, he was invisible, reduced to a source of discomfort. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded fiercely. "I served, Tommy. I did what most people can't even imagine, and now you won't even give me a haircut?" Tommy's jaw tightened. "Look, Jake, it's not personal. It's business. People don't want to see that." His hand gestured vaguely toward Jake's face, as if the words themselves were too repulsive to speak. Jake felt the sting of betrayal sharper than any physical pain. This wasn't just a refusal. It was a rejection of who he was, of everything he had sacrificed. He left the shop without another word, the door's chime echoing like a closing chapter. Outside, the sunlight hit harder, the air suddenly heavier with shame and disbelief. He was supposed to be a hero, yet here, in his own town, he was met with cold fear and avoidance. But news travels fast in tight-knit communities, and it didn't take long before the story reached the ears of Jake's Special Forces brothers, the men who knew exactly what those scars represented. They saw Tommy's refusal as an affront, not just to Jake, but to every veteran who had ever faced judgment or prejudice after returning home. For Jake, the cold refusal was a wound deeper than flesh, a spark that would ignite something far larger than a simple haircut. The sun had barely risen when Tommy's cuts unlocked its doors, but the quiet streets of the town were already humming with an unusual energy. As the bell above the door jingled open, a parade of resolute figures stepped inside, men and women clad in the unmistakable patches and fatigues of the Special Forces, active duty soldiers in crisp uniforms, and even a handful of families bearing the badges and honors of their loved ones. This was no ordinary morning. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration, one born from loyalty, forged in blood, and shared sacrifice. From his vantage point just outside, Jake Thornton stood silently, the weight of what he was witnessing settling deep in his chest. The barber shop, once an arena of quiet routine, had transformed into a sanctuary of solidarity. Each chair held a warrior or kin, the air thick with the palpable tension of restrained anger and unspoken resolve. Conversations bubbled quietly, but with undeniable force. Stories of combat, survival, and the invisible wounds that ran deeper than skin. These men and women spoke in tones that echoed far beyond their words, a language of honor, respect, and the unyielding demand for dignity. Inside, Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he ran a comb through a grizzled veteran's hair, the familiar motions now heavy with new meaning. The refusal he'd issued the day before, a refusal born not of cruelty, but of fear, had rippled through the community, transforming a private prejudice into a public challenge. Tommy could feel the weight of eyes on him, the silent accusation in every guarded glance and firm handshake exchanged among the patrons. The barber shop was no longer just a place to cut hair. It had become a battleground for respect. The old barber, once confident in his routine, now found himself wrestling with a gnawing doubt. In whispered moments away from the crowd, he confided in a trusted friend that it wasn't hate that had driven him to turn Jake away. It was an overwhelming intimidation, a terror of the unfamiliar. The scars on Jake's face were not just marks of war. To Tommy, they were symbols of complexity he felt ill-equipped to navigate. He feared botching the cut, feared alienating other customers, and above all, feared the unknown. But the men and women filling those chairs offered no room for fear or avoidance. Their presence was a challenge and a promise, one of unwavering support for a brother who had been cast aside. Their quiet strength transformed the barber shop into a fortress of unity, a declaration that no veteran's sacrifice would be dismissed or forgotten in this town. For Jake, watching this rising storm from the outside, the bitter sting of rejection gave way to a cautious hope. What had started as personal humiliation was swelling into a movement, an unyielding demand that respect for those who served be not an act of charity, but a right fiercely upheld. The energy crackling inside Tommy's cuts was more than just resistance. It was the birth of something powerful, something that could reshape the very fabric of the community. As the day wore on and stories continued to be shared in that small, once quiet barbershop, one truth became unmistakably clear. This was no longer about a single haircut. It was about honoring sacrifice, confronting fear, and forging a future where scars, visible or invisible, would never again be grounds for exclusion. That afternoon, the air in Tommy's cuts shifted palpably, no longer weighed by tension, but charged with a tangible resolve for change. Mark, a retired Special Forces medic with hands both steady and kind, stepped forward with quiet authority. His eyes, reflecting years of trauma and healing, met Tommy's with an unspoken invitation to bridge the gulf between fear and understanding. "Let me help you," Mark said simply, his voice steady but infused with compassion. "I know the scars. I know the care they need, and I know how to respect the men behind them." Tommy, shoulders heavy with the weight of his earlier refusal, nodded slowly. His pride, once a barrier, now softened by the realization of what his fear had cost, not just to Jake, but to the community. He accepted the offer with humility, a silent promise etched in every gesture. Mark didn't come alone. Alongside him was a specialist barber, a woman whose expertise in cutting hair for burn survivors was renowned. Her presence carried the quiet strength of someone who had walked this path many times, turning what others saw as flaws into marks of resilience. The training was intense and focused. Tommy learned to navigate the contours of scar tissue, to blend shadows and highlights in ways that honored the skin's story rather than erased it. He studied the emotional weight each scar carried, how a wrong touch could reopen wounds far deeper than the surface. With every lesson, his confidence grew, replacing ignorance with skill, fear with respect. Weeks later, when Jake returned to Tommy's cuts, the difference was unmistakable. Tommy met him not with avoidance, but with a handshake firm and sincere, a silent acknowledgement of Jake's dignity. The chair Jake settled into was no longer a symbol of rejection, but a throne of reconciliation. The haircut itself was meticulous. Every stroke of the blade and comb was deliberate, a testament to newfound understanding and honor. Tommy's hands, once trembling with uncertainty, now moved with purpose and respect. Outside the barber shop, news of the transformation spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with photos and testimonials, not just of a haircut, but of a profound cultural shift. Veterans shared their own stories and scars openly, emboldened by the example of Jake's courage and Tommy's redemption. The town, once indifferent or ignorant, began to see these marks not as blemishes, but as badges of valor. This was no mere personal victory. It was a community reclaiming its humanity. The scars that had once isolated were now threads woven into a tapestry of collective pride and respect. The transformation at Tommy's cuts symbolized something larger: the power of empathy to overcome fear, the strength in education to dismantle prejudice, and the unbreakable bond forged when a community chooses to honor those who bore its burdens. Jake's journey, from rejection to acceptance, embodied a fundamental truth. Respect is not something granted out of charity, but demanded through unity and understanding. The Special Forces collective action, fueled by loyalty and integrity, proved that injustice can be confronted without violence, that courage in the face of scorn can inspire change more enduring than any battle won by force. In this quiet Midwestern town, amidst the hum of clippers and the scent of aftershave, a new chapter began. It was not only the story of a haircut, but the triumph of dignity restored and a community awakened to the real cost of sacrifice, visible scars that told stories of survival, honor, and unyielding human spirit.